The end of Chavismo and the quiet reordering of the Western Hemisphere. Some regimes collapse with gunfire. Others vanish with paperwork. The removal of Nicolas Maduro from Venezuelan soil by American authorities did not resemble a coup, nor did it follow the theatrical brutality of regime change familiar from the Middle East. There were no tanks rolling into Miraflores Palace, no revolutionary councils proclaiming salvation, no dramatic last stand. There was only a flight out of Caracas, and with it, the forced termination of an entire political experiment. What ended that day was not merely a presidency. It was Chavismo itself. For 2 decades, Chavismo had presented itself as an alternative political civilization, a fusion of left-wing populism, resource nationalism, anti-American rhetoric, and the promise of strategic sovereignty in a post-Cold War world. It claimed to be neither orthodox Marxism nor liberal capitalism, but something distinctly Venezuelan, buoyed by oil, insulated by ideology, and legitimized by electoral ritual. Yet the modern international order has grown increasingly intolerant of regimes that attempt to enjoy the benefits of global markets while rejecting the rules that govern them. In such a system, ideological ambiguity is no longer quaint. It is a liability. Maduro's removal marked the moment when that liability was finally called in. From revolution to strategic nuisance, Chavismo did not emerge from poverty. It emerged from mismanaged abundance. Under Hugo Chavez, oil became the master instrument of politics. It financed social programs, purchased military loyalty, projected influence across Latin America, and, most dangerously, created the illusion that Venezuela could stand outside American-led global order without suffering meaningful consequences. For a time, the illusion held. High oil prices and a permissive international environment allowed Chavismo to function as both redistributor and defier. But when prices collapsed, production withered, and external patrons such as China and Russia grew less willing to underwrite dysfunction indefinitely, the system revealed its core flaw: a distributive state with nothing left to distribute. Maduro inherited not a revolution, but its ruins. Unable to reform and unwilling to retreat, he chose the last remaining option: repression, electoral manipulation, and the gamble that Washington would not escalate beyond sanctions. It was a fatal miscalculation. Not Saddam, not Gaddafi, a Noriega for a globalized age. The script written for Maduro was neither Baghdad 2003 nor Tripoli 2011. It was colder, and far more final. The true precedent was Manuel Noriega. Like Noriega in 1989, Maduro was not treated as a defeated head of state, but as a transnational criminal. The moment he entered American custody, he ceased to exist as a political actor. He became a defendant. That distinction matters. Political enemies can return, criminals do not. There are no negotiations, no dignified exile, no symbolic afterlife. There is only indictment, incarceration, and gradual erasure from public memory. Washington did not need to execute its challenger. It merely needed to remove him from history's present tense. This is not national reconciliation. It bears stating plainly what many analyses avoid. Maduro's arrest was not designed to heal Venezuela for Venezuelans. Its objectives were narrower and more strategic: to permanently sever the possibility of regime restoration, to eliminate any figure capable of becoming a resistance symbol, and to clear political space for a post-Chavista order compatible with American interests. If Noriega was a message to Central America at the close of the Cold War, Maduro is a message to the entire Western Hemisphere in the 21st century. There is no longer room for governments that oppose the United States while remaining dependent on the global system it anchors. You may criticize Washington, but you may not live off the system while defying it indefinitely. The chosen figure, the moral mandate, and the limits of permitted power. When power vacuums appear, symbols are inserted. In the space created by Nicolas Maduro's removal, Maria Corina Machado did not rise by accident. She emerged because she fit a precise strategic requirement: recognizable but non-threatening, principled but predictable, internationally legible but domestically constrained. Her elevation reflects less the triumph of Venezuelan opposition politics than the mechanics of orderly geopolitical succession. The awarding of the Nobel Peace Prize in 2025 was not an anomaly. In moments of systemic transition, the Nobel has often functioned not as a retrospective honor, but as a preemptive legitimizer, a moral credential designed to stabilize expectations before real power is transferred. For Western capitals, Machado represented an ideal intermediary, untainted by Chavismo, unburdened by oil patronage networks linked to Russia or China, free of militant or revolutionary associations, and, crucially, structurally incapable of unilateral defiance. She was not selected for strength. She was selected for safety. The Nobel is a constraint, not a crown. The Nobel Peace Prize does not confer power. It defines the limits within which power may be exercised. A transitional leader entering office under a moral mandate is paradoxically constrained by it. Failure becomes unacceptable. Pragmatism becomes suspicious. Necessary compromises risk being reframed as ethical betrayals. Machado's role, therefore, is not to innovate but to reassure, to markets, that contracts will be honored, to Washington, that alignment will be maintained, to international institutions, that reforms will proceed on schedule, and to foreign publics, that Venezuela has been returned to responsible governance. Reassurance, however, is not sovereignty. The four structural constraints of transitional power, should Machado, or any successor drawn from the same political mold, enter Miraflores Palace, they will inherit not an empty state but a distorted one, hollowed yet resistant. 1. The military, silent, not reformed. Venezuela's armed forces did not collapse with Maduro's departure. They withdrew into silence. Years of patronage, smuggling revenues, and political immunity under Chavismo have left senior officers with little incentive to embrace reform. Machado commands no personal loyalty within the ranks. International recognition does not translate into control of barracks. Her authority over the military would be procedural, not personal, fragile and contingent. 2. The oil state remnant, networks that survive regimes. PDVSA is not merely a firm. It is a parallel state. Technocrats, intermediaries, logistics brokers, and shadow distributors endured sanctions, production collapse, and political chaos. They did not disappear. They adapted. Any transition will depend on their cooperation, yet reform threatens their survival. This tension will define the early years of post-Maduro governance. 3. External conditionality, reform by requirement. No reconstruction effort will proceed without the blessing of Washington and the resources of the International Monetary Fund. That support will arrive with conditions: currency liberalization, subsidy reduction, labor market restructuring, and energy sector opening. Economically orthodox, these measures are socially combustible. Implemented too quickly, they risk destabilizing the very transition they are meant to secure. 4. Public expectation, recovery without time. After years of deprivation, Venezuelans will demand recovery, not reform. They will expect relief, not sequencing. But post-populist transitions rarely deliver immediate prosperity. They deliver austerity, rebalancing, and political fatigue. Machado, or her functional equivalent, will be forced to disappoint repeatedly, watching moral capital erode with each necessary refusal. Oil, the unchanging axis of power. There is no post-Maduro Venezuela without oil, and no Venezuelan oil revival without the United States. Washington does not need to seize assets. 21st century power operates through licenses, standards, capital access, and compliance regimes. The pathway is familiar: sanctions relief tied to behavior. Operating licenses for American firms, corporate restructuring of PDVSA, and aid conditioned on market reform. Officially, this is economic reconstruction. Functionally, it is reincorporation into a U.S.-led energy order. For the new government, the trade-off is unavoidable: economic recovery in exchange for reduced strategic autonomy. Accept the terms and be accused of surrender. Reject them and forfeit solvency. This is not choice, it is structural compulsion. A liberated state, with bounded freedom. Maduro's fate was sealed the moment he left Caracas. He is no longer a leader, only a legal file. Machado's fate, too, is bounded. She may symbolize change, but only within a narrow corridor of permissible outcomes. Venezuela may re-enter global markets, stabilize its economy, and reduce isolation. But absolute autonomy was never on offer. what is being constructed is not a new independence, but a post-Chavista order compatible with American interests and international financial norms. History rarely repeats itself precisely, but it favors patterns. And Venezuela, once again, has been compelled to conform to one: no exit, no third way, the end of Chavismo as a hemispheric signal. Every transition tells a story. Not every story is written by those who must live with its consequences. Post-Maduro Venezuela is no exception. Its future is being assembled less as a national rebirth than as a managed reintegration. A return to a system from which it once declared independence but never truly escaped. The question is no longer what becomes of Nicolas Maduro. That question has been resolved. The more uncomfortable inquiry is whether Venezuela ever possessed a viable alternative to the path now unfolding. The answer, in the end, is no. The cost of being out of alignment in the 21st century. In the 20th century, Latin American governments could hedge. They could denounce Washington rhetorically while trading with it pragmatically, nationalize at home while borrowing abroad, posture as revolutionaries while remaining embedded in Western systems. The 21st century has closed that space. In a global economy defined by concentrated financial plumbing, integrated supply chains, compliance-driven insurance and logistics, and technology regimes dominated by Western firms, absolute sovereignty has become not merely elusive, but structurally incompatible with participation. Chavismo persisted by mistaking ideological posture for strategic insulation. It assumed oil revenues would be perpetual, that China would underwrite indefinitely, that Russia would provide political cover, and that the United States would tolerate prolonged defiance without escalation. Each assumption proved false. The consequence was not simply regime failure, but national redesign. Washington did not win, it prevented precedent. It is tempting to describe Maduro's removal as an American victory. That framing misunderstands modern power. Washington did not need to win. It needed to prevent a dangerous precedent. Had Maduro endured, the message would have been clear: a government could defy the United States, manipulate elections, remain integrated into global markets, and survive. For Washington, that outcome was unacceptable, not because of ideology, but because of systemic risk. The response was correspondingly modern: legal pressure rather than invasion, targeted sanctions rather than blanket embargoes, financial isolation rather than territorial conquest, and, when necessary, the removal of a single individual whose presence blocked resolution. This was power exercised quietly, bureaucratically, and decisively, the kind hardest to resist. Machado as manager, not author. If Maria Corina Machado succeeds, Venezuela will stabilize, re-enter global markets, and slowly recover. If she fails, a new generation of leaders will inherit the blame, not for destruction, but for the inability to reverse it quickly enough. Yet in neither scenario does Venezuela regain full strategic autonomy. Machado's role is not to rewrite national destiny. It is to administer re-entry. Her mandate is managerial, not transformative, her success measured in compliance rather than creativity. This is not a personal indictment. It is a structural reality. Leaders who inherit collapsed populist states rarely govern freely. They govern within corridors designed elsewhere. The message to Latin America: Chavismo's political death sends a message far beyond Caracas. Resource-based populism is a finite strategy. Anti-American rhetoric cannot coexist indefinitely with dependence on American systems. Personalist power corrodes institutions beyond repair. There is no durable third way outside the prevailing global order. Governments that continue to conflate sovereignty with defiance will eventually confront the same reckoning. Venezuela is not unique. It is merely early. Conclusion: a state survives, and ideology expires. Chavismo promised dignity, independence, and justice. It delivered economic ruin, social exhaustion, and institutional decay. Nicolas Maduro will not become a martyr. He will not be mythologized. He will persist only as a legal record, invoked when deterrence is required, then forgotten. Venezuela will endure. But not as Chavismo imagined it. History is unforgiving to those who confuse rhetoric with power. In the 21st century, such errors are not corrected through reform or reflection. They are corrected through replacement. Venezuela now moves forward, not by choice, but by the template of its era.